y'all saw that. Jacob Hill was a senior at Summerall and passed away this week while he was at work. So, any others? Miss Dot's not feeling good. Miss Dana's not feeling good from yesterday, is what I would assume, probably. All right. Well, we will pray and get started. Gracious God, thank you for this day and thank you for this time that we have to come back and to learn more about our brothers and sisters in faith, Lord, and other belief systems, Lord. And I just pray that you'd be with us in this time, Lord. I pray that you'd be with those who are out of our number this evening. There's many of them, Lord, and we just pray that you would be with them in their situations, Lord, and that you would bring them comfort and that you would just be about them and let them feel your presence, Lord. Lord, grant us also the awareness of your presence tonight as we continue and finish this study on the LDS Church, Lord, that it would be beneficial to us and that we would be blessed by it. And it's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen. All right, so this is the same way when I taught college. I really hate lecturing to like 3 people, but I don't know what else to do. So I have got a couple of handouts for you. One of them is snarky. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you. There is the top one, which is a list of things Mormons can't do, and then the second one is a little tongue-in-cheek thing, how to be Mormon in just 73 easy steps. The reason why I'm using these two, I am not intending to have a tongue-in-cheek attitude toward the LDS, but in trying to research what makes the LDS and what sort of governs the way that LDS folks sort of live, there's a lot of interpretive difference, let's put it that way. So I started making a PowerPoint and I gave up on it. Where 3 or more are gathered? Yeah. So instead, what we have here, by the way, both of these writers of these 2 articles are both practicing LDS. So even the one that's kind of snarky is written by somebody who is in the LDS Church. So I think probably we'll start with some general comments and then we will kind of move into particulars of this. If you've been around Latter-day Saints, you will know that they are particularly good people. They are very giving people, they're very generous people, they're very helpful people. They tend to live reasonably quiet lives. Are you looking at, yeah.
What did I read that? They eat a lot of vegetables and fruits in their seasons.
There's a sort of you might find the LDS teaching doctrine and that sort of thing. How to approach the way that, what we might call Latter-day Saints culture. So, as we've mentioned before, LDS families tend to be loving families, having big families, having close families. And so that motivates a lot of the way that Latter-day Saints choose to live. The other things that you will see are those issues that are particularly related to the physical body. So a couple of issues that come into play with that are caffeine, which we'll talk about that in just a second, the fact that they don't do caffeine, and medical decisions, which really are not that complicated when it comes to the LDS. It's much easier to do that with the LDS than, say, with the Jehovah's Witnesses. So all of that to say, you really have sort of the big 3 categories. You kind of have ministries, family, and what I'm going to call physicality. Those are my categories, not theirs, but I think they work. So in terms of the family structure, a couple of things we touched on last week. One of them is the issue of divorce. We talked canceled by the president and the prophet, however that sort of works. I'm not entirely clear on what that process is. But it does happen, and they view divorce as an unfortunate necessity at times, in cases of abuse or other thing that would kick you out of fellowship with the local LDS ward or anything like that. Another hot button issue, and I'm really going to blitz through a lot of this because it's just easier to do it that way. Same-sex marriage. The LDS has a really interesting position on the LGBTQ plus big conversation. I believe it was during President Obama's administration that there was a big conversation about repealing the Defense of Marriage Act, which preserved sort of the one man, one woman kind of family, and questions about how does the nation recognize same-sex marriages? Does it recognize them? What tax benefits and all of that sort of stuff are given to them? And what the LDS did is they come out with a statement and they say, as far as our doctrine is concerned, as far as our practice is concerned, we still consider same-sex marriage to be sinful. But we also recognize and wholeheartedly support legal protections for individuals so long as it doesn't infringe on the rights of the church, aka is sort of where the LDS landed on that. Now, the nuance, some of the nuance within the church itself, yes. I think it's kind of interesting, and I'm not sure. I suppose that they would just say that you grin and bear it. I don't really know. But, on that emphasis on family, you haven't been married. And so I suppose that the idea would be that you have same-sex attraction, but you sort of overcome that by whatever means in order to be married in a traditional way and are therefore in accordance with LDS doctrine. But their whole mission, and I think this is something that we could learn a lot from, they really don't want to make enemies out of anybody, because the LDS ideal is that they're going out and they're doing mission and they're bringing as many people into the church as they can. And so you're not really ever going to see the LDS make these really hard and fast political kinds of statements. Now, I say that also saying that in a recent survey, 74% of people who identify as Latter-day Saints also affiliate with the Republican Party, which means there's 26% that are Democrats. I think they're probably uncomfortable Democrats, given LDS standards, but they do exist. So that's sort of, I think maybe a lot of, and if you think about it in terms of United States politics, it makes an awful lot of sense. Typically, your LDS politician, but he's not in the Trump wing of the conservative side of the party, right? He's very much kind of bringing it more toward the middle. There have been others in the Congress who have been that way. Their governors are typically moderate. Now, you got some that just really kind of swing way out there. Mike Lee, who's a senator from Utah, is an example of someone who gets on that very conservative side. But by and large, I think because the church is so interested in keeping its doors open to everyone, you kind of see a moderated approach to political issues coming from people within the LDS church. Any and all sexual activity, and you'll even see that on that a complete list of things Mormons can't do sheet. Any and all sexual activity outside of marriage is considered a sin, full stop. Doesn't matter if it's same-sex, doesn't matter if it's heterosexual, whatever the case may be. That is reserved for the family. That is reserved for the marriage. They have a very traditional sexual ethic in that way that I think regrettably most denominations have thrown to the wind. they also are encouraged to set aside, now this is where the family and the ministry aspect sort of meet. LDS church members are encouraged to set aside one evening a week to spend together in family home evening. And family home evenings during as a family to study LDS gospel principles and to do other family activities. They also encourage daily family prayer. Normally that's Monday, but depending on the family, that can change. Also related, I guess, maybe commitment to education. They really emphasize and believe that one of the most important aspects of life on earth is the opportunity for individuals to learn and grow. And so you're probably familiar with Brigham Young University. It's huge, it's massive, it has incredible influence in the academic world. They have a church education system which funds all of this stuff. Brigham Young is supported by the church. It has a Jerusalem Center, and it also has extensions. So you've got BYU Idaho and BYU Hawaii, which I think is fun. Again, it's education on mission. We're planting our education centers in places whereby we can also do mission work. And they also have an undergraduate college, Ensign College. Really interestingly, all church members 12 years and older attend Sunday school. So no younger than 12, I would assume they have some kind of child care for them, but Sunday school is 12 and older. This is where you get your meat and potatoes of personal scripture study, whatever other kinds of spiritual education, personal self-improvement. I mean, this is where you go, this is your accountability group in a lot of ways. Okay. Of course, they have seminary education, primarily out of Brigham Young. But there is also, that's sort of on the academic side, they also have seminary training that is scheduled before and after school hours in local places. This is for high school students. This is, we think about seminary, we think about somebody who's graduated from high school, maybe has even graduated from college and then is going to seminary in some way. Not so with the LDS. Seminary happens for high school students, secondary school students. And particularly in areas that have really large LDS populations, some of the schools will actually allow students to attend seminary off campus during the day. It's voluntary. Now, they don't, of course, make their secondary students do this, but it is considered when a person applies to a church-owned university. So you want to go to Brigham Young and your LDS will have you gone to seminary. All of this is part of the church educational system, which is, again, a massive arm. There is also a low-interest educational loan program called the Perpetual Education Fund. They're helping people go to school. This is like the Southern Baptist Cooperative Program. It's kind of the same thing. Kevin's a product of the cooperative program with his education through the Southern Baptist. They're doing a similar thing, except they're allowing their people to take out loans at low interest rates through the church. They finish their education, they pay back they enter the workforce, and they pay back the funds. Once the funds go back to the Perpetual Education Fund, they're recycled and reused for somebody else. It's a really, in that way, it's really great because you're not dealing with a bank. The fund exists to send people to school. That's what it's for. You've got some auxiliaries of the church, the local young men and young women. John Monet has a friend who is LDS, and every so often John Monet gets a message that the sisters are coming to have dinner. This is the young women, I would assume. I think that's great. The sisters are coming to have dinner. They have, since 2020, since COVID, they have really renewed their investment in youth initiatives. And so they have a week-long, they have these week-long experiences called For the Strength of Youth. That used to be that was sort of shoehorned into Brigham Young, but since then they have pulled it back, and they've sort of brought it back to the local church. Okay, let's see. What else? We know about the missionaries. The LDS Church has one of the most massive and active missionary programs of any world church. In 2014, there were over 88,000 full-time LDS missionaries serving around the world without any pay. Young men can begin serving at age 18 with a 2-year term. Young women may do the same at age 19 for an 18-month term. But there are people, just like with us, there are people who dedicate themselves to this. It's a fundamental principle of the LDS movement. I think it's really interesting that some of the ways that they get around government issues on mission work is some places will allow them to come in and be all about spreading the LDS gospel. As we know, even from our own missionaries, there are places where religious teaching is not permitted. And so when that's not allowed, then, okay, well, the LDS is coming in to do humanitarian work. Or they're coming in to do family history work. So they're getting them in there still with an eye toward the doctrine and the practice of the LDS, but not necessarily with the express mission of preaching and teaching the LDS gospel. So I think it's sort of interesting. I mean, we actually both know Hannah. Once, I guess, is still planning to go on the mission field. Last I knew, she's, very Baptist, whatever. When I first met her, she was getting a degree in education so that she could get into other countries to do teaching, and that was going to be her way in so that she could do mission work. So, we all do this kind of thing, but I think it's interesting that for the LDS, they've figured out areas that are still associated with their overall mission in order to get their people in. Okay, so let's talk about one of the fun ones. I say this with meaning no disrespect, but most of us know that Mormons are preppers. They are 100% ready to go in the event of a global catastrophe. And I don't think all of them are as hung up on this as some of them are. But the LDS encourages, the church itself encourages members to be prepared for all kinds of disasters. So this is economic disasters. This is, sort of World War kind of situations, nuclear attack kind of situations. I mean, they really have an eye toward this. I think you see this more in rural LDS communities than maybe in city ones, but there are places where members are encouraged to plant gardens. They're encouraged to store at least 3 months of food and water. They're encouraged to have a 72-hour kit. This is not, popular culture has done a real number on this one. This is not because they're worried about the end of the world happening and they need to be prepared for the end of the world, but they are very aware that things can go wrong. And self-reliance is a big part of LDS thinking. So the church is equipped with items that would be needed for rapid distribution, but they also are saying to their members, you need to be able to take care of yourself so that we can help those who can't. And if you're a really good member, then you're able to help yourself and also able to help somebody else. By the way, Brother Glenn could have said more about this if he were here. The LDS is not so insular that it's only helping its own members. You'll hear him tell disaster relief stories in which, the Southern Baptist Disaster Relief is there, and also LDS Disaster Relief was there. They're doing this kind of work, and they're not discriminating who. Again, it's a part of a mission for them, just like it's a part of a mission for us. And what about, I guess getting back on the political side and the family issue for a minute, abortion is a no-go. Neither is, well, historically at least, surgical sterilization is also a no-go. Now that has sort of changed. Artificial birth control, no. We're not having any part of that. Again, it's about the family. You need to be prepared for whatever kind of family you decide to have, but you need to know that your choices have consequences. All right, now here we go. The word of wisdom is the LDS Health Code, if you want to call it that. That's an interesting turn of phrase. But there's a little bit of confusion, I guess, on this. What the LDS actually prohibits is the consumption of alcohol, the use of tobacco, and the consumption of hot drinks, which were later defined as coffee and tea. A lot of us live under the impression that caffeine is the thing that's outlawed. And many LDS members choose not to partake of caffeine. I went to high school with a guy, all they drank was Sprite if they drank a soda of any kind. Otherwise it was water. That came about as a result of an article that was published by one of their apostles in I think it was the 1950s, when he decided to go investigate Coke, and what he found was that tea has caffeine, coffee has caffeine. Maybe that's the common thread between them, so therefore maybe we shouldn't have anything with caffeine in it. That was never official church teaching. So you'll never find an official LDS document that says, don't drink Coke. That said, there are some who just don't, for, first one reason or another. There has been a move toward, and I think this probably makes more sense, there's been a move toward considering caffeine as a drug, and therefore it's mind altering, so then it becomes a problem, because it's like alcohol. They want to be in full control of their faculties and of their decisions and circumstances. And so there has been a move to consider caffeinated beverages in that way. This is my own pet interest, beards. Dominic's like, why are we doing beards? It's very quick. All LDS presidents had beards until 1951. Since David O. McKay became church president in 1951, all church presidents have been clean-shaven. Since the 1960s, the LDS has encouraged men to be clean-shaven because they did not want them to be associated with the hippie and drug culture and the counterculture of the 1960s. So this is, looking different than the world at that point. They still maintain that men should probably not wear beards. to the degree that formal prohibitions against beards are used or enforced for young men entering missionary service. So you'll never see an LDS missionary with a beard. Students and staff of church-sponsored schools, so Brigham Young, no beards. You go to Brigham Young, shave it off. It's got to go. The only exceptions are for skin conditions and then approved theatrical performances, which I think is fun. But up until 2015, that you got no other exemption. That was it. Otherwise, you just don't get to have a beard. In January 2015, Brigham Young decided that non-Mormon students who wish to have a beard for religious reasons, so a Muslim man or a Sikh man, could be granted permission after they got a religious exemption. So, this is like, there is no, and they are open about it. There's no theological basis for this. It's 100% preference. So.
Kind of sounds like Pharisees and Sadducees when they built things around the law.
Right.
And added, of course,
I mean, again, we want to wrinkle our nose at it, but it's like, how many Pentecostals do you see with beards? Not many.
or outward appearance.
Right.
There's more about outward than inward.
Right. There was a campaign in 2014 to loosen the beard restrictions, and it went south real quick. They actually made them worse because of this. Part of the guys who had been granted a beard exception had it revoked, so then they had to be clean shaven. And for part of a week, the LDS Business College required students with an exception to wear a beard badge, which basically became like a scarlet letter. It was a badge of shame. So, yeah. All right, maybe the final thing that we need to talk about that might be of interest, if there's something else, hit me and I'll see what I can do. Issues of modesty. LDS women particularly are very modest people. Now, this doesn't mean that they are forced to wear skirts and long sleeves, but it does mean they're very modest. The LDS Church says revealing and sexually suggestive clothing, which includes short shorts and skirts, tight clothing, and shirts that do not cover the stomach, can stimulate desires and actions that violate the Lord's law of chastity. That's straight from them. So it encourages them to dress modestly. Now, I said I wasn't going to do this on the live stream, but I suppose that I will. There is, and I will use this term once, and I will use it no more, a cultural phenomenon about Mormons' magic underwear. I'll let that sink in for a minute, and then we'll move on. This is, they are undergarments for men and women who have undergone an endowment ceremony in temples. What that is actually called is a temple garment. And the purpose of the temple garment is to remind them of their covenant commitment to the church. It's also intended to replicate the priestly garments given in the Old Testament. But, I mean, it really, so I guess you might want some description of what this thing looks like.